Alrighty, here we are. Castle HR, Modern HR as a Profit Center presentation. My name is Tom Nickalls. I am the founder of Castle HR, and we'll be walking you through this presentation today. So let's jump into our quick thesis. What we're trying to accomplish today is to show how modernized HR strategies can be implemented in 12 months and generate $250,000 in annual returns, which is amazing. Nobody's really talking about HR in this mindset where you're looking at it as a profit center. Most of the time, people look at HR as a cost center. So my idea in brief, the context is most companies look at HR as something that they have to do. It's a necessary evil. So they tend to plant that on the back burner when they're starting up and growing in those early stages, once they found market fit and start to grow. And not until they get to that headcount of about 40 to 50 do they actually, think about, oh, we should probably have a formalized HR strategy now. And that's when they bring somebody in. The main reason is because at that point, it makes sense to hire someone internally. So before that is just not cost justified. So the challenge is now you have an HR person coming into a company that is well established in how they do things. And now you're trying to sort of turn that ship in a different direction, which causes a lot of friction and can have a lot of people leaving the company because of that, because that's not the company they signed up for when you make these changes. It's a huge challenge we see all the time. So a different approach that companies are trying to take and starting to look at, and what we promote, is taking the approach of investing early in HR strategies. So having that foundation by implementing processes that are going to impact the growth and help you through those trajectories so that you don't have that pause when you get to a certain headcount and decide now is when I want HR strategies. You can have these before. And the great thing is that they do impact your business along the way. It's actually be a smoother growth when you're going through a sprint or like a hockey stick growth trajectory. It really does sort of grease the rails for you at that point. The main thing you're going to be able to do to understand with these companies, if your HR processes and strategies are working, is track HR data points. Like everything else you look at, you're going to monitor certain KPIs. Same thing with HR. And you're going to understand then where to focus resources and what the return is on them. And that's where we sort of get that opening statement of making 250K from HR strategies. So the result is, like, if you're a company and you're 50 people and all of a sudden you identify that you have a 25% employee turnover rate because you've never looked at it before, or all of a sudden now it's become that high in the last 6 or 12 months, that's a data point that's really, really valuable. You need to look at it. It's almost as valuable as cash flow. So you want to look at that and be like, okay, what is my industry standard? Is this acceptable? In tech, it's 13%. That's what you should be aiming for. Probably below that is where we typically take companies and want to aim for. So if you're looking at reducing a 50-person company's turnover rate from 50 or 25% down to 13%, if you're calculating out and know your employee turnover cost averaging at about $35,000, let's say, and we can certainly go through those calculations as well, that's going to be savings of $210,000 a year, which is massive at that point if you can keep your turnover rate. But if you're not looking at that, you're kind of putting the finger in the air to kind of feel how the wind's going, but you don't actually know how fast it's blowing. So knowing the data, knowing what data points to look at makes such a big difference on where you're going to optimize. And then the recurring savings are going to happen when you actually address them. So let's go through a couple of case studies for those that aren't familiar with Castle HR and how we help companies. Quest Audiovisual is this amazing company out of Toronto. They are a global entity where they're actually going to go out and do auto trade shows, expositions, conventions. They run all big, big screens, audiovisual for major, major markets. So what they were doing before COVID hit was going around internationally to set up these expositions. Obviously, COVID put a stop to that. They were actually in LA when it really went on shutdown, about to set up, and they said, no, we're canceling the convention. Al, the leader there, realized at that point that he needed to realign with his company and address this COVID situation. Luckily, Quest was working with Castle HR. We were able to put together a strategy very quickly based on those new programs that were coming out in March when Trudeau was coming out. Strategy for them able to save them a couple weeks of payroll from where they actually thought they were going to lay people off or furlough them. And we were able to put this strategy in place, execute that, clearly communicate it to the team. So what that meant is they had instant savings on their payroll because they got it up and running so quickly. Because they communicated so well to their team what was happening and why it was happening, and actually gave them the tools to go forward as far as applying for different programs, that meant a lot to that team. So now that Al's pivoted, as most smart business owners have, he's bringing people back on, and he's finding that it's coming back at a really, really high readoption rate because he treated them so fairly. And those savings, as you can see here, $221,000. Even if you're just looking at the salaries, that's $86,000. ThinkOn is another great company. They're in cybersecurity, and they've been on a great growth trajectory over the last couple of years. They started working with Castle HR in early 2020, and they really did want to take off this year. But the problem is they wanted more than just incremental growth that they were getting year over year. And we really helped them build out their HR foundation. We're talking to them about their different performance reviews, their hiring strategies, onboarding strategies, and it's really allowed them to just, as you can see, take off here. That number is actually going to be probably closer to 80 by the end of the year. And you can't have that kind of growth if you don't have solid HR strategies in place, or you're just going to have a turnstile situation for a number of roles because people are going to come in, you're not going to necessarily pay attention to them, give them the kind of structure they need, and they're going to end up leaving. So it actually becomes a negative situation at that point. So ThinkOn is a great case study right now as far as a company that's just absolutely on the rise. Another company we worked with was Crowdlinker. When we started with them, they were trying to implement this a heavy performance review that wasn't quite working. There were too many touch points. It was very convoluted. It was taking up a lot of time from leadership and their managers. So they wanted us to come in, and we started with their foundation, building out their proper handbook, realigning their values, getting them their proper performance review based off of that. Built this out, as you can see from the quote here, which when you see someone talk about how a performance review touched the lives of their people, that is amazing. And most people, when they think about performance reviews, get a shiver. It just goes down their spine because they have such a negative connotation to that experience. But rather now we have such a positive one, excuse me, with Crowdlinker that has really galvanized their team and brought them together. That when they were going through COVID and tough times, they were able to sort of pull together and get through because of that galvanization of that team. So really interesting on that side. So those are a couple quick case studies. The presentation overview for what we're actually going to get into in the meat and potatoes, so to speak, we're really going to talk about that HR foundation that I was just alluding to in those case studies, which is talking about building out your formalized values, making sure that they're in place, they actually reflect your company, and they are going to drive the actions and culture that you want at your company. We're going to build out a custom employee handbook. So it's going to have all the policies in there to protect you, make sure you're covered, reflect those values so it does drive the right actions and behaviors you want to see at your company. Safe workplace training, so sexual harassment and workplace violence. Big conversation piece before COVID. Now everyone's remote. It's a little bit different, but there's some, traumatic situations that happened in the back end of 2019 that everyone in the tech industry was talking about. And then we're talking about return to work. So now that COVID is a thing, when are we going back to the office? What does our return to work strategy look like? Tell me about our health and safety processes. These are the foundations of your HR. They're basically, if you think about it as a table, they are the four legs. If you ignore one, start building other HR processes on top, it's eventually going to fall over and it's not going to work. This is where we start with every company, ABC's foundation, whatever you want to refer to it, it needs to be in place because nothing else works without it. So typically the first thing we stack on top of that foundation is the level up process. And that we're talking about the performance reviews. So as I mentioned with Crowdlinker, actually have something that refers to your people. So we're talking about, skill development. We're talking about career paths. We're talking about mental wellness check-ins. From a management standpoint, you're going to be able to have visibility into succession planning. You're going to understand how long people are staying, where they're trying to go. You're going to see that year over year growth of productivity, and also that your career tenure or employee tenure is actually extending at that point. So key on that side, when we're talking about that example from the beginning of employee turnover, one of those key aspects or processes you can put in place to combat a turnover that's a little bit lower is your performance review. That conversation is key to anchoring your employees. So really, that's a level up process. We're going to look at that, stack that on top of the foundation. Then we get into creating what we call the talent magnet section. So now we know who your values are. We know what your behaviors are from the foundation. We've now built out a performance review and identified who's running at top speed. We can look at why are they successful? What traits do they have? Who else is then going to be successful in this company? And then go to market and find them when you're recruiting. Building interview processes, guidelines, scorecards on how do you attract those players? What do they care about? What does that onboarding process look like so they get up to speed as fast as possible? These are things that are going to go into that talent magnet section. And when you put those all together, that's really when you become that destination for a company. And that's what we're talking about for this presentation. So the HR data points, the last one here, as you've already seen me, I'm going to allude to a couple of those that we go into. There are tons that we look at depending on your company, what you need, and really identify where those opportunities to optimize are. That's going to be a deep part of this conversation. So who is this for? Getting into this. So anyone wearing that HR hat is really who we want to start chatting with now, which can be founders, executives, operations people, and of course, existing HR people at that point. So anybody that's looking at growing their company aggressively in the next 12 months and really want that shortest path to building that all-star team that's going to get you to your goals, that's who wants to talk to us and wants to pay attention to this presentation. If you're a company in tech that has at least 15 employees and you're looking to get to that 50 mark where you would be able to bring on an HR person, like this is for you. This is going to bridge that gap very, very nicely for you. And then once you're over that hump, once you're in that 50, 60 spot, or maybe at 40 where you have an HR person, but they're just swamped at this point, that's where we can come in and we can complement them with some of these tools. Maybe they're just on recruiting right now and they can't do anything else because you're growing so quickly. That's where we complement teams really, really nicely, able to help them out. Anybody that isn't aware of their turnover rate or doesn't know what their average tenure is, definitely want to pay attention to this. If your average tenure is under 2 years, that's a concern. We should be looking at this. If you're in tech and your turnover rate is over 15%, we should definitely be looking at this. On that, if you do understand that you have a turnover challenge and you are feeling that sort of churn burn, because you are using recruiters, you are paying fees for them to find those amazing people that they find, but then you're just not keeping that staff long enough to get that ROI, this presentation is for you. And lastly, one of the most common conversations we have is people that have bad door or bad glass door reviews and want to have a conversation about how they can improve that, what they can do better. This is going to be for you on that side. Who this presentation is not for is people that are looking for a silver bullet, magic pill, a lever to pull to get this done tomorrow. That's not how this is going to work. You need to understand that HR is a long game. There is no point where you're not looking to optimize and iterate and advance because trends are going to be changing. Your people are going to be changing. The culture of your company is going to change. As you grow, your organization is going to change. As a leader, you will change. There's always going to be things to look at with HR at that point. So it's going to be that long game. If you're in for this long ride, you have the humility to know that this is something you need help with, happy to have a conversation. If you're just here thinking, HR is a necessary evil, I just want some policies in place, I just want to know the bare minimum, this is not the solution for you. And like everything else, negative attitudes aren't going to get it done here. You need to come in with a glass half full mindset. You want to get this done. You want to help your people. That's who we want to help. The core concept of this presentation are that modern HR is a game changer. No organization is the same, so they're all going to need different strategies at this point. Your company is different, my company, different than a company down the street. Everybody's going to have their own individual HR strategy that's going to make them the best company. So that's really key at this point, that you can't just use templates and be like, hey, this company is doing well, I'm just going to borrow what they do. It's the same thing like trying to steal their sales script. Like you can't use their sales script and talk about their product because that's not going to sell your product. You really need to focus on what your people want and what kind of company you want to have. That's where it's going to be. It's all individual at this point. A modern HR strategy will become a profit center in 12 months if you are laser focused on building repeatable processes that optimize your key data points. That is massive at this point. Like if you're looking at those data points, you're looking to optimize them, you understand that this is going to be something you need to continually look at and evaluate. We're going to get you there in 12 months. We have the roadmap, we have the strategy, we've done it before. This is what we do every day. That is something that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Most founders and execs, honestly, aren't equipped to provide modern HR strategies. They probably didn't take our HR at school. They've probably never been part of an HR team. And these new mechanisms and strategies that are out there for modern HR aren't known to every HR person as well. So it's really a matter of having the best practices, the best in breed brought to you, customized for your company, and that's when it's going to work. Lastly, Castle HR, we're the only company looking at HR this way. I'm pretty sure you probably haven't heard talk about HR ROI as directly as we have to those HR data points. It's something we spend a lot of time building out and understanding how we can influence them. What is a path? What is the order? What is the sequence? It's a lot of trial and error that went into this and building it out. And we're very happy with what we have. And we're the only company in the world looking at it this way. So on that note, before we get into the meat and potatoes, quick background on myself. I've been around entrepreneurs. I've been an entrepreneur pretty much my entire professional life. My dad started a company later in life, and I was employee number 4 when I left university. And I was employee number 4, literally stocking shelves and dealing, shipping, and receiving at that point. As employee number 4, we grew the company up, got to watch how he grew the company, which is absolutely amazing to see that firsthand experience, the trials and tribulations, the work ethic that it takes to go into creating something is quite magical. And having that as my baseline, I was then inspired to go off and start my own company. And it was a shred consulting firm back, we're going back about 10, 12 years now, where that was like tech companies didn't know what shred was. And we'd walk in and be like, how much are you getting for shred right now? And they wouldn't even know what shred was. It was an amazing time to sort of share around that success. And now it's common knowledge and more of a commodity service, which led me then at that point, after being wildly successful there, to exit and join one of those tech companies that I was actually talking to and working with, where I then went into selling 6-7-figure SaaS software solutions into FIs, insurance companies, automaker OEMs at that point. And, I had a lot of success there. We've made some amazing partnerships, really sort of broke through on what digital, e-commerce can be in that automotive sector. Wildly proud of what we did there. Then decided to join a company that was launching in Canada to build out an entirely new inside sales team. And had an amazing experience doing that and building that out, where I grew the team from 0 to 40 and actually did, 8-figure sales in that first year. And we were just smashing all sorts of records across what we thought we were going to do. It was a wonderful experience at that point to sit in a hyper growth company. At the end of the day, ended up leaving there, went on to a couple other ventures, but eventually came back to I wanted to start my own company again, and decided with Castle HR that blending my background on working with tech companies, seeing that HR was such a focal point right now, but it was really amplified with tech companies where you have that hyper growth. HR is so important. And I saw that where if you don't have proper HR structures, your company might be successful, but it's a limited option at that point. It's not sustainable. So that's where we sort of launched Castle HR. We've been around for a couple of years now with some wild success. As you can see here, working with companies like the DMZ, 111, PeerScale are all official partners. Working with Mars as well. We have great partnerships with the CFO Center and work with some of the best tech companies around. We also work with a lot of professional service companies and help them out, and as well as some small businesses. But our core bread and butter is really working with tech companies, and that's where we really do excel. Alrighty, let's get into the meat of the presentation. How to modernize your HR strategy in the next 12 months while generating over $250,000 in annual ROI. Huge statement. Before we get into sort of the tactics and the processes we use, I want to have a quick conversation about some data points and how we look at this differently. This is a chart from Google Hire, which outlines an employee lifetime value. So it quickly demonstrates the milestones of an employee's experience with a company. So from start date to their last day. And you can kind of see where they're contributing, where the output is positive, how it goes. The tail at the end is actually the exit cost. So sometimes when an employee leaves, there's additional costs associated with that. And that does obviously make it a deficit at that point. The important part of this simplistic chart is to understand these milestones and data points, because traditional HR doesn't look at these or really map them out. They are aware of them, certainly, but they're not really actively focused on them, which means that they're not improving them. Because if you're not tracking, you're not improving. And that's where Castle HR is different. We look at these data points as all opportunities to tactically optimize them. So, how do we ramp up faster? How do we hire the best talent? How are we improving our team year over year? How are we keeping people longer? These all produce massive efficiency gains to a company. But if you're not actively tracking these data points, you're not going to improve them. And that's a simple method. How do we do this? We've taken that chart and mentality and then built out our modern HR process. And this took a while for us to develop. This really shows over the course of a year the most impactful processes and instances that we can have with a company. We have three kind of phases that we focus on here, where initially it's your foundational HR, which I kind of talk about being a table that you're about to build everything else on. So if you have a table, you want it to have four sturdy legs, because anything you build on top of that, all the other HR processes are just going to fall over if your table and your foundation is not solid. So there we're talking about unlimited expert advice, making sure that employee situations are dealt with, values, employee handbook, safe workplace. These are all things that are table stakes at the end of the day. So we need to have that in place. And that takes about 3 to 4 months for us to build out with a typical company. Then we're getting into the level up stage, which is all about performance reviews, and not your traditional performance review that you're probably thinking of now, actually modern performance reviews, which is an ongoing conversation loop that really focuses on, skill progression, career path, mental wellness, basically getting your employees to see the vision and stay longer with the company. If they know they're going to get promoted, they know they're going to get the tools to get there, of course they're going to stay longer. That's really the focus of this section, is building out that holistic modern performance review conversation. Then we get into the talent magnet section. This is where we're looking to leverage that first two instances of your foundation. We know what your values are, performance review, we know who's really contributing to the company. Then we're going to look to emulate that and hire more A players. A players are the top 10% of the population that is available for your price point. That's who you want bringing into your company. An average company only has about 25% A players, meaning that 75% are B and C players, which means that they're not producing. So the A players are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And that's where that old adage probably rings true, where it's like the 80% of your productivity comes from 20% of your team. That's a reflection of this. So that's where we look to improve. How do we identify your A players? How do we bring them on? How do we attract them? How do we get them up to speed as quick as possible? That's a talent magnet section. And then that's the totality of the first year. Second year, you kind of go through it again. So starting off with culture eat strategy. This is where we're talking about employee retention. This is one of the biggest data points, or probably the most common question that we get asked is, how do I keep my top talent? And the reason people ask that is because replacing is bloody expensive, right? When you're looking at the average turnover cost, we see it at about $35,000. And that doesn't necessarily mean if you lose an A player, we know that 75% of the time, you're getting that wrong and bringing on a B or C player to replace that A player. This is why business owners and leaders are so scared about losing top talent, because they don't know how to bring top talent back on again. So we'll address that later on. But for now, it's focused on how do you keep those people. And the easiest way to keep people is culture. If people enjoy coming to work, they like their teammates, they like their office, they feel fulfilled, they're going to show up for work. Culture has tons of engagement stats behind it once you get it right. You're talking about they're almost 60% less likely to look for a new job. Your retention rate can go up as much as 7 times. You're 21% more productive. You're 3 times more creative. There's a bevy of stats out there, and these are coming from HBR, Gallup, Forbes. Reputable sources are producing these stats. So there's tons out there on culture. Now, how do you build culture? That's kind of the question a lot of people want to know and don't necessarily get right. So when we're looking at that, we're looking at Ben Horowitz here. Your culture is how your company makes decisions when you're not there. And this is a simple way of looking at it. If you're looking for culture because it drives retention, that's what it is. That's what we're trying to get. But it's actions, according to Ben Horowitz, that drives culture. So it's what your people do that create your company culture. And it's so true, because if you do nothing for culture, you still have a culture, because your people are going to self-define what that is, whether you're influencing or not. And that's where it comes in with values. And that's why a lot of people have values and want values, but they don't necessarily understand how to utilize them or how to build them properly. Because values is what's actually going to influence the actions, and the actions then influence the culture, and the culture influences the retention. So this is key to understand. So when we're looking at this, traditionally companies that we talk to, have cookie cutter values that they saw somewhere else, or maybe had at a company before. And same with their policies. They might have seen somebody else do something. So they have these loose policies and loose values that don't really correlate together, don't really sort of paint a straight line to a North Star that you're trying to get to. And that's where it sort of falls down. You don't really have that defined culture. You're not promoting it. Again, you're not measuring it, so you don't know so you're not going to improve on that. And that's where the new way comes in with Castle HR. Is we sit down and we go through a rigorous values building exercise where we're going to understand exactly what you're looking for. Here we joke, brew your coffee, then we'll brew our ideas. Go through a process with us, understand what your values are, build out that first version of them, then use them, again, going back to the chart, use your values to create actions. What we're talking about there is creating your first employee handbook. So actually a formalized policy book that's going to have you draw directly from your values and influence and explain what it's like to work at your company, what the expectations are there as well. And that's going to drive the actions, which then drives the culture. So you can kind of see how these are working together, and they're kind of stacking already. When we're talking about values, we're talking about a handbook. These are two pillars or legs to your HR foundation. And that's when we're going to see people stay longer. If they're happier, they're engaged, you have the people that believe in your culture and your direction, they're going to stay longer. So, questions. At what stage should a company build their company values? And I always say yesterday. There's never too early a start point to look at your values. And Castle HR is a great example of that. When I was founding Castle HR, I wanted to build a company that was remote, had flexible working, to really drive home that work-life balance. And because of that, when I was sort of kicking around the idea and talking to different people about it, about what I was trying to build, I was actually introduced to a couple of HR people right away. And they jumped on the opportunity to come on board because they loved how we were looking at things, what we were trying to solve, but mostly how we were trying to do it and what lifestyle was going to be like, basically what it was like to work at Castle HR. And quick examples were we have people that are sort of on the back nine of their career where they're not looking to put in a full week anymore. They're trying to wind down a little bit, but still do want something to do. And then we have people that have young families that want to stay home more and be able to have that flexible work style, so that they can spend time with their families and raise their kids. So this really gravitated with them. So what happened was Castle defined their values and what it was to work at Castle HR. And that has led to us never having to post a job for an HR person. And we have a roster of them. So it's really incredible how it can impact right away. So how long should you target employee to stay? For tech, the average is about 2 years. We look to target about 3 plus years on that side. It's really going to come down to your industry. If you're talking about professional services, we have engineering firms that are seeing, plus 5+ years on their side. We also have some, cannabis stores that are more retail based that are obviously seeing less on that side. They're to about a year. So it really depends on your industry and what you're trying to do with that role. So, why is an employee handbook so important? Now, we've already talked about the impact, and this is sort of the first 2 points where it's introducing the organization's values, making sure that they are getting across to your team so you can build out that culture. And that's done by communicating the expectations of leadership and the employees clearly in this document. So that's the most important part. Then we're getting into reducing exit costs. So making sure that you're compliant at that point, like having a sexual harassment policy, having accommodation policies. This is in there to protect you down the road. That's what's going to shorten that tail on the exit costs. Where employees can turn for help. This is a document that's going to allow them to sort of self question and go into this document to answer any questions that they have before coming to leadership and using up their time. And it's a phenomenal recruiting tool. Like we've seen, or at least I've seen out there, hopefully you have too at some point, the Netflix employee handbook, which talks about being a high performance environment and how you must be, really motivated to work there. The Tesla employee handbook, which is a little tongue in cheek. You can kind of see how they do things. There are tons of handbooks out there. Some are cartoons, which are a little bit more fun and playful, but it really does paint a picture of what it's like to work at that company, which is a phenomenal recruiting tool. Because if you see Netflix's handbook and be like, I am a high performance individual that's really driven by results, this is a place that is going to understand who I am and also reward me for that. That's fantastic. That's where I want to work. So great recruiting tool if it's done really properly. Why is it important for employees to sign an employee handbook? We get asked this quite frequently as well. And it comes down to, as you can sort of see at the bottom there, what can you prove? If the Ministry of Labor or an employment lawyer comes to call on you about a situation, what can you prove? Just having policies in place isn't enough. That doesn't mean that the employees saw them. You can't prove that. You can't prove that they agreed to them by signing off on them. So you really need to have this formalized document signed off and stored somewhere, and then be able to have a quick process for amendments to be able to update as laws change or your processes change. All right, now we're going to talk about performance reviews, which is the second efficiency gain. And I'm sure you might have just had a shudder go down your spine thinking about what a performance review is. And a lot of people think about it in that old methodology of being done annually, like once a year. You sit down with your manager, it's all a big blur. They just talk about what you did wrong and what you need to do better for the next year. And then they go off to do the other 10 that they have, and they're still trying to hit their targets and complete their deliverables. And it's just a mess. It doesn't work well. It doesn't inspire your team. Deloitte actually did a survey recently that found out that 58% of their performance review efforts were worthless and ineffective. So you can see if an organization that's structured isn't getting this right and isn't seeing the ROI, that's why so many other people aren't engaged with this. And the other big challenge that happens along the way is that you get what's called the Santa phenomenon with the traditional annual review, where everyone's on their best behavior leading up to their performance review because they know they're about to be graded, they know they're about to get a bonus or raise on it, and they're absolutely on their best behavior. The challenge there is that, like parents, leaders have a hard time thinking back to the entire year. And therefore, they do tend to just do performance reviews on the last 3 months. And so that's not an effective way of doing this. And then there's no accountability going forward because the other 9 months you can run rampant, knowing that you only have to really, button up for the last 3 months and you're going to get your raise. And it's hard then when you're talking about top players and A players that are being graded at the same of B players that are really just trying to shine at the end and trying to stand out. So it's not treating your top players, and that's also why you do have some top players leave because they're getting the same compensation as the B players. So that's where the old way is really struggling. LinkedIn also did a survey of HR and execs, and it came back that 77% of them believe that performance reviews aren't actually doing their job because they're not effectively grading performance. So they're really not doing their job. And this is why nobody really likes performance reviews as a whole. And when we took this on and saw these data points, we really wanted to bring in what we call a modern performance review. And we looked at successful companies doing this. And the one that we really liked the most was Apple. They were doing it very, very well. And we kind of distilled down their model to what a small growing company would want in place, not necessarily the global company. So when we talk about modern performance reviews, we're going to start first and foremost with values and measuring culture. So again, building off of what we've just created in the HR foundation, where we've defined our values to influence our actions, we're now measuring those actions to make sure that it's happening. So we're getting the culture we want, so that we're getting that employee retention that we want as well, and saving that $35,000 for each turnover. So what we're doing there is having a conversation on a quarterly basis, we've defined what the values are, but now we're going to be asking, are you living up to those values? Are you influencing culture in the right way in this organization? And if you're measuring that, people are going to start living up to it. People are going to start, going along that. Because again, if you measure it, you will improve it. So that's where we start. The second aspect that we really look at for performance reviews is the career trajectory and the skills that are needed to get there. So what we're talking about there is sitting down with an employee and being like, hey, where do you want to be in a year from now? And they might say, I want to be a senior developer. I want to be a sales manager. I want to be a CA. Whatever they want to aspire to, you then as a leader have a structure now to understand, okay, this is where you want to get to. How do I help you get there? And that's where we blend in the skill progression with that career trajectory. So then we're going to be like, okay, how do we get you there? What skills can we, give you internally? Can we do some mentoring? Do I need to send you to a course? Is there an expo or convention that you can go to? Is there a book that I should suggest that you read that really helped me? Have that kind of conversation, but ultimately you're getting people on that path. So you're upgrading their skills. You're also leading them to, that senior position. So they're going to be growing within the organization. And as you grow, you're going to need leaders to emerge. And then you're going to be able to keep them longer because they know where they're going. So if you have that level of engagement, that's really where you start holding on to people, and you're really galvanizing the team through that culture and values part as well. And then you're going to have conversations naturally that come up around mental wellness, how the employee is doing in their personal life, which has such a big impact on their professional life. So it's good to understand if someone's like struggling to buy a house, maybe they have a situation with their partner, maybe their pet passed away, whatever the case may be, you can adjust your expectations and help them work through it. And that's such a powerful conversation to have as well. And again, galvanizing the team. This is why we saw that positive reaction from Crowdlinker, where it's like, hey, this touched their lives on a personal level. These are the conversations that you can have. And you really become that work family at this point, and more than just an employee showing up. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the actual performance, but we're not talking KPIs. If you're in sales, you kind of know how you're doing by looking at the board. Marketing, you can kind of look at, the return on some of your initiatives, but you can't measure finance necessarily. So what we build out is something that is global to the entire company, where you have the same performance expectations. Are you achieving X, Y, Z? Are you showing these traits? That is more important, and performance and results will come if you're meeting those. That's where we sit down with companies again to really personalize this, because it's all individual at the end of the day, and it's going to come back to those values as that touchstone. So again, we're stacking all these together, and when you have this working and this modern performance review, that's again using the holiday metaphor, they're going to light up like a Christmas tree. That's where you see that engage or galvanize. Again, the Crowdlinker experience of this touches them on a personal level. So questions. Will modern performance reviews take more time? The actual process of executing is typically about 2 to 3 hours per employee per quarter. So if we're talking on the high end of that, we're talking 12 hours a year on this. And if we're at a senior leader at $100,000 a year, that's $50. That's $600 to extend and get more productivity, extend that retention. The ROI is just incredible on this. Even if you are spending money on courses or sending them off to conventions, the ROI is just huge on this at this point. Yes, there is some setup time at the beginning, but that's where we do most of the heavy lifting as well. What happens when everyone wants to be a manager? This is something that does come up, where you do have these aggressive A players that you're hiring and bringing on, or staff, and they all do want to grow within the company and want to be senior members of the team, leaders, managers, directors, however you sort of have it set up at your organization. And it can be a challenge. But typically, we're talking about getting to that level sort of 2 to 3 years down the road. So when we're keeping people for 3 years and they're producing along that 3 year period, and then you have a choice of, pick of the litter for those three that are going to go into that seat, that's a good option to have. You know who's going to go into that seat. You get to pick the best person. Yes, you are going to lose two of those people. They might go somewhere else for that, equal position that you just don't have and can't offer them. But that's okay because you can see that coming as well. So your succession planning is done a lot better. You know where you have to backfill because you know they're going to leave. You know you got the contribution and ROI out of that hire. Everyone's not going to stay for forever. That's not the you have to accept that reality, but you have to be able to plan for it and know the unexpected exits and sort of are the ones that really can cause some upset to the productivity and to your growth. So having this in place, understanding where they are is great. And it comes down to that old adage where a CFO is talking with a CEO, and the CFO says, what if we invest in our team and they leave? And the CEO rebuts, what if we don't and they stay? So it's a great conversation to upgrade your team, get them producing, get the most out of them. And it's a great story if they're leaving for new hires that you're looking to bring on to be like, hey, I used to be in your seat or the seat you're applying for, and now here I am as a leader. There are three other people at different other companies doing the same thing that came in and started at the same time as me. This is where you're going to get to. Wow, what a great conversation for a new hire to have in a job interview. How much do I need to invest in a skill progression plan? Great question. It can be literally anything from $0 all the way up to unlimited. This can be internal mentoring or free things. You can have, online articles you can send over. You can sign up for some subscriptions to like an HBR or Medium to increase their knowledge base. You can then also like recommend books as we're climbing the ladder. You can take some, small courses all the way up to courses that might be, $10,000. And on that, when we get to that sort of end of the spectrum, there are things that we can do to help out. Two things specifically. One, we're going to highlight this to the employee that this is part of their compensation, and they need to think about it that way. That hey, I do get paid $80,000, but I am getting this $10,000 value course over here as well, which is going to increase my earning potential down the road. So you want to highlight when you're doing expensive courses or big spends like that. And second, a lot of those expensive courses, there are some great grants out there where you can actually, buy a $10,000 course, but only pay $1,000 to $2,000 for it. But then you're also getting that $10,000 value with your employee. So it's really well done instruction, and we can help you out with that if you have questions about it. And especially setting that up is key, is really understanding what your team wants and what they need. And then we have the tools to sort of help you get to that point. What if our managers have never done performance reviews before? Yeah, great question on that side. And to be honest, we expect that none of your managers or leaders or yourself have done a modern performance review how we do it. So we heavily invest at the beginning. And this is why it takes 3 to 4 months just to build out that performance review as well, because the back half is on training the leadership team on what the expectations and how to run it are, training the managers on how to execute and what the process is for a modern performance review, and then also talking to the team to let them know what the goal is. And this is an investment in them and why it's going to be a benefit to them and explaining it. And then talking about the different mechanisms that are in that performance review. So it's key to have those conversations and training and make sure that everybody is equipped with the right knowledge and be able to have the right conversation. Now we're going to talk about how to hire and identify A players. Starting off, A players, why do you want them? What kind of impact do they really have? So A players, if you're talking about stakeholder returns on an average company, are going to produce 22% better results than the industry average if your team is stockpiled with them. So if we're talking about that 75 to 80% level of A players in your company, you're going to produce at that level. What we're going to talk about for developers, the top 3% of developers are going to produce 1,200% more lines of code. Top 3% of salespeople are going to produce 250% more sales. So you're getting multiples of people. You're hiring one person, but you're actually getting 2, 3. In the case of the top developers, over 10 times the productivity of a normal or average hire at that point. So it's so key that you have this focus on finding these A players because they really are worth looking for and waiting for. And what does an A player actually mean? Like we said, that 10% of available talent in your market at your price point, that's what we're looking at for an A player, which does mean you can have A players at entry level. So you can have a 30,000 annual role and still be looking for A players for those roles. And they do add up and they do make a difference. So what's the challenge that we're seeing today is companies don't really have a solid hiring plan. Yes, there's 10% available in the market, and we're seeing an average of 25% of A players in a company, but that means that they're getting it wrong 75% of the time. Which, going back to the performance review, which why people are so concerned about retaining their top people is because they know it's hard to find it. And 3 out of 4 times they're getting it wrong when they're replacing somebody. And as we talked about, with a $35,000 penalty each time, it adds up really quickly. So you need to make sure that you get this right. And that's also why people settle on keeping B players, because they're not sure that they can find, that top talent. So traditionally, you're going to see job descriptions with a huge list of expectations and skill sets and fancy letters behind their name and decades of experience and crushed quota and did all these things. And you paint yourself into a corner looking for that perfect employee. And that's a big challenge. And that's why people pass a lot of time on A players, because they don't realize what an A player is for their organization. You're going to have those traditional, mindsets of what you're looking for. But what you can do now is leveraging your values, knowing what your culture is, going through their performance reviews and understanding who your top producers are. You can start to build out a customized ideal employee profile. Similar mindset to an ideal client profile, which is often used in sales on who you're going to be targeting and who you're building this for. You want to have the same thing when you're looking at recruiting. So you want to build out exactly what your ideal person looks like. And it doesn't have to be a massive list. You're looking for some key traits on that side, but you really want to be tactical about it. I'll give you an example of Pret a Manger. They are a coffee and sandwich shop out of the UK and New York. And what they do is essentially they look for people that are going to be making sandwiches, going to be making coffees and being a barista, and then also engaging with their guests. So rather than looking at a list for a new applicant that says, like, hopefully you have 5 years of being a barista, made sandwiches for 27 years, and you are the kindest person in the world and everybody loves you. Like, they don't make that list. What they've done is something really simple. They realize that they can teach people how to make amazing coffees and how to make amazing sandwiches. But what they look for now is engaging people that make guests smile and give that positive experience. They do that, and then they teach them how to do the other two things, making sandwiches and being a barista. And that's such a positive strategy for them. So if you can see that from that simple sort of example, how you can break down roles and who's going to be successful at your company in certain roles, your hiring grades are going to go through the roof at that point. So you want to now have identified how you're going to, or who you're looking for. Now it's a matter of how do you identify that? And that comes in with the interview questions, where traditionally you're going to have a screening call to kind of get to know somebody and get that sort of gut feel for them, which is not necessarily the best way. You're then going to go through some generic interview questions, maybe multiple people sort of coming into the room for different questions to get other people's sense of how this candidate is looking. And then ultimately, you might have a project or something that they're going to go through. But that's not the best way to look at bringing on talent. What you want to have is a structured, tactical way of doing this. And you want to remove some of the hiring bias that occurs there, because people are going to gravitate towards people that look the same as them, who went to the same school as them, has the same experience as them, because that's what got them where they are. So they think that's what it takes. It's a natural human emotion. And if you have a proper structure, and we're talking about here with, having a interview process or a interview scorecard, that's something that can help you get to remove some of that bias from that conversation and really identify A players probably that other people are missing and what an A player is going to be for you. So that's ultimately what the result is going to be. If you have this process in place, you're going to be able to hire people quicker and identify those A players right away. So you have less interviews. You're going to be able to, put offer letters in front of them more confidently. Maybe even pay a little bit more for somebody to be a little bit more competitive, to go up by 10%, knowing that they're going to produce probably 120 to 150%. That's fantastic to do as well. You're going to woo them with your modern performance reviews that you now have. You're going to talk about your culture and your values, and you show them your employee handbook and talk to that. So this is all sort of starting to work together now to bring on those A players that are going to grow your company to what you want it to be and help you achieve your goals. What should I look for in an ideal employee? Every company is different. It's as simple as that. It's like, I'm not going to look for the same thing that Pret a Manger looks for, that you look for, that the company across the street. Everybody's different. It's really coming back to, again, your values, seeing your performance reviews, who's successful, building out your customized ideal employee profile. And then we're going to refine that as we go through this process over and over again until we get it really, really, really buttoned down. How much does an A player really help? It's a spectrum. McKinsey put out a stat that it says it generates between 50% to 400% over an average hire. And that depends on the complexity of the role. So for an entry level position, you might be 50% better for an A player, but you might have 10 entry level positions. And if you're doing 50% from each of them on top of what an average hire is, that adds up quickly. For versus a more complex, if you're looking for like a VP of sales, VP of engineering, a CFO, that kind of level of complexity of role can have that up to 400% impact. And that's really when you want to look for somebody there as well, because that is a huge impact. There's a little less room for error on that side, but huge, huge impact. So it really, really does add up, especially if you're looking across the entire organization. What is an interview scorecard? So let's click on this. I'll show you a really simple one that I made up, and something that I always included. Here you can see we have a total of 27 questions. It's totaling it up as you click on it. So now it's 8. So you're going to ask, very binary questions is the best way to do it because it's easy to answer and it removes that hiring bias. So for me, I was hiring a lot of salespeople throughout my career. So as did they arrive on time? Obviously key for sales. Are they dressed appropriately? Again, are you respecting who you're meeting with? Did you bring the appropriate materials? So for interviews, did you bring a resume? I would always ask someone to bring a resume and then ask them to give it to me. And then you're going to look at preparation. That was a big thing on my side, especially again in sales. You want to show that you did some research on the company. You know who we are. You know how big we are. Maybe you looked us up on LinkedIn. Can you explain and articulate our product and our offering? Do you know our competitive landscape? These are all things that were important to me. Education and experience do matter. Are they relevant? Culture fit, competencies, project and skill evaluation. These are things you get into and you sort of fill in later on and really customize for you. But that's how an interview scorecard works. And you're going to get a total once you're done. And you can kind of look at it and be like, okay, out of 27, you need to get 23 or 24, and then we hire you. And you draw a line. So 23 or up, we hire you. 22 down, sorry, it's a pass. And you just have to get to that binary decision. It makes it really easy. There's no humming and hawing. There's no more conversations around, and I've literally witnessed this, where people are like, he's good, but I want to interview a couple more people to see what's out there. And then you lose that candidate because somebody else scoops them up and makes them a killer offer and says, I want you to come here, versus stringing them along. Like once you identify somebody, move quickly, move succinctly, tell them you want them, and then you bring them on board. How do we know if this is working? Well, you're going to see A players joining your company. That's the sort of short answer. You're going to see it in your performance reviews. You're going to see it in your culture. You're going to see it in the employee tenure that you're getting because they're going to stay a little bit longer. You're going to see the difference between the A players and the B players. So you're also going to understand, what your offer letter acceptance rate is. Like if you're identifying top players, A players, and you want them to join your team, are they accepting your offer? That's part of it as well. So you need to balance that out to be like, can I identify them? Am I offering what they want? Am I putting it in front of them at the right time? And then you'll see if it's working because people are going to join you. Okay, now we've got your A players coming on board. The next thing we want to look at is how do we get them to contribute as soon as possible? Basically, ramp them up. And it's always a question of would you rather have a new salesperson hit quota in 3 months or 6 months? Everybody wants 3 months, but nobody puts in a plan or strategy or even a measurement to understand when they're supposed to get to certain points. Like, yes, you might be like, after 6 months, we kind of expect you to hit quota, but go out there and figure it out. And a lot of the onboarding strategies that we run into sort of fall into two categories. One where it's a hot potato, where it's kind of you get dropped in different people's laps and passed around the organization, basically to shadow them, kind of see what they're doing. They're not really managers, they're not really responsible for you, but it's kind of like, I'm too busy as a manager to train you. We have no structure. So go talk to Joe, go talk to Sue, follow them around, see what they do, and just do what they do. They're the best at what they do. That doesn't really teach a new hire how to do it. The other strategy I see a lot is sort of the hop or the high five and the t-shirt mentality, where it's you come in for onboarding, you're given your swag bag in a tech shop, and then you're kind of like let out to the wild and be like, okay, go produce. Neither of these really do what you need at the beginning. You want to capture that excitement that comes when you get a new job. It's exciting. Like you're coming in with all this energy. You want to manifest that into being able to translate across the organization so that everyone catches a little bit of that new energy. Companies that do this well will like let an employee leave at 3 o'clock on their first day. And as new hires are walking out, everyone's like clapping and smiling and congratulating them. And it's such a positive experience on all sides. Like I bet you probably even had a little smirk when I was clapping and smiling there. It just radiates that positivity and it gives people a good experience. They're going home to tell their family about this. They're going to tell their network. These are important things. You want to have that positive experience at the start. And then you want to really build out a structured 90 days for how you're going to get them up to speed. Like, what is their goal? Like, where should they be at 90 days? And then it's the company's obligation to get you to that goal. It shouldn't be left up to the new hire to be like, okay, go figure it out. Like that's not the right way to do that. And especially if you're talking about attracting A players, you want to have this structured approach to be like, hey, in the first 90 days, we're investing in you. We're going to get you training. We're going to get you to sit down with some of our clients, talk to them. You're going to talk to some of our top performers. They do presentations. They're going to tell you what made them successful. Talk to people that were in your role that are now have moved up in the company, what helped them to succeed. Like that is a structured approach that you're going to have HR people touching base to be like, hey, how are you doing, new hire? How are you think you're progressing? A manager, how is the new hire progressing? Have some milestones. Like they probably should be at this point. They probably should be at this point, right? Like understand what that is and then track it. Again, if you measure it, it will happen. If you don't, it's sort of, that hot potato or, high five mentality. So you really want to have a structured ramp up period. And that's really different for every single role, every single company. Again, it's going to be customized and it's a matter of what makes sense for you and what you can sort of get out of this. And then we're going to be sort of talking about once you've had that, handoff from your probation or that first 90 days into the performance review. So now you're going to actually hand back off. So you have that transition. So if you don't have the performance review in place, after 90 days you're kind of okay, like now what? So that's why we again have this in this HR, this modern HR process where it has a regimen, there's a rhythm to it, there's a strategic path that we're following here, because now once they've done their wrap up, they pass their 90 days, now they go into the performance review and it's a handoff there. So it's really key on that side to have this structure built out. Questions on this? How do you measure ramp up time? It's a great question. Sales is obviously very easy when you're talking about quota. And we're talking about, okay, after 3 months, we expect you to be hitting, $40,000 a month in quota. And this is what people have done traditionally. So this is the expectation. So there should be a reason why behind it. And if there isn't valid cases to back up that this is achievable, you need to be a little bit flexible on that. Now, with other roles, this might be like, hey, I want to be able to give you these kind of projects, or you should be doing these kind of tasks by yourself on a daily basis. I shouldn't have to double check this. You should know what you're kind of doing. Like there are different measurables you can do if it's not as sort of KPI driven. You can look at the responsibilities. A key way of doing this is meshing with the job description from the talent acquisition side of things to make sure after 90 days, this is where we expect you to be, achieving these expectations from your role. So get to that point. Like, it's going to take some adjusting sometimes. Other roles that aren't straight KPI driven can be a little bit tougher, but we'll work with you on that. There isn't much that we haven't seen at this point. Will different roles have different ramp up times? Arguably, everybody kind of fits into that 90-day onboarding. Maybe if you get into those senior roles, and yes, there is a difference. Talk about like a senior VP of engineering, a CTO, CFO, VP of sales. They have a much larger responsibility and larger action plans that they're going to have to deploy that will take longer than 90 days to sort of get into it and really start having that impact or get up to speed to fully contributing. But you still can have, again, those milestones at 90 days. We kind of want you to be here. So there are some measurables that you can put in place. So that's why we use 90 days pretty much across the board. Should your probation period match your ramp up time? Yes. This is why we like 90 days, because then it is one of those things. If you're at this point, you have clear definitions, you have expectations, you've had a conversation with them about this, about with the new hire. So they know where they should be after 90 days. So then that's going to align well with your performance or probation review. So then you can have that conversation and then hand off to your performance review. What happens if a new hire is not at 100% after the onboarding process? This is what that probation period is for and why we like to align that. So again, if they're meeting their expectations and they're getting there, you hand them off to the performance review. If they're not, there's sort of two roads you can take. One is you can, pass on the employee and say, hey, you didn't pass probation, so we're going to let you go, and you go back to hiring again, learn why that employee didn't work out, and iterate and refine your process. The second option there that a lot of people don't know about is actually extending the probation. So you do have the option to be like, hey, we're kind of seeing like, 75% of what we expected, which is good, but it's not quite there. So we'd like to extend another 90 days. Here's a revised expectation at that point, and then let's revisit it then. The challenge with that is you need to get an employee to sign that. If they don't, you have to be okay with basically letting them go and saying that you didn't pass, but we're not extending, or we extended this extension, but you didn't pass, so ultimately you fail if you're not accepting that extension, and now we're going to move on. So you have to be okay with that. So at the end of the day, this is kind of where you want to get to. It says talent magnet status. If all of these things are working, if you're moving all these data points out, iterating, optimizing, growing, you're going to have such a positive environment for people to come in where they know they can grow, they know they're taken care of, they know that they're invested in, they know that they're going to climb the ladder, they're going to have a career path, they're going to have a long career there if they want. So they all know this, and this is when that talent magnet, or you turn into that destination, where as soon as you put up a job posting or somebody knows that there's going to be a role opened, they're actually calling their network to be like, hey, Jane, dust off your resume. There's this amazing new role in finance department that I think you'd just be brilliant for. This is a great company. This is where I started, da, 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 da. And that's what's going to happen. You're going to get those 5-star reviews on Glassdoor. Everything's going to be going, in that positive direction where people are going to be fighting to leave companies where they're getting paid the same just to come into your door because you have such a good culture and environment. That's really where you want to get to. That's the ultimate goal of this modern HR process, is to get to this talent magnet status. Here we're going to look at all of those modern HR processes and work, showing the efficiency gains on a single hire of a junior sales rep. Now here we have 2 sales reps that have been hired at the beginning. Gray is in traditional, orange is using the modern HR strategies. And what we're looking at here is a monthly quota of $40,000 in sales. That's what we're targeting here. So you can see right off the hop, the hiring efficiency of the modern HR is going to save you money because we're going to have that talent magnet mentality where recruiting is a lot easier, cheaper, and faster. So they're actually going to come on sooner, they're going to ramp up quicker, and they're actually, because you're hiring those A players, they're exceeding that 40,000 monthly quota right away and getting up to close to 50. So we're talking about 20% better, so probably about 48,000. When you're talking about the traditional methodology, you can see there's a cost center at the beginning, slower ramp up period, and they're not quite getting up to 100% quota because you didn't hire an A player. Remember, 75% of the time, you're missing that shot. So you're actually underperforming all the way across. And you can see after year 1, with modern performance reviews, you're going to be able to level up your your hire, and they're actually going to produce more on that monthly quota and just be that absolute A player that you know that they are, versus a traditional one. They're sort of plateauing, underachieving, no performance review in there. They're probably getting told they're not doing a great job. Motivation is sliding. They're going down. Their sales are dropping off, and ultimately they leave the company, whether it's by a termination or failing a performance improvement plan, or they just move on. But this is a story that happens all the time. So you can see that just drop off, which leaves the company then scrambling for a couple months without an empty seat, having to go through that experience of hiring again, ramping up and onboarding. And you can see that, game-changing gains that are going to happen when we're talking about that modern HR process. So you're actually going to keep them for that 3-year period. It's going to extend. They're going to grow again, maybe going up to a manager position after that, a second year. And then you can see this. And when we're talking just on a junior salesperson with a $40,000 monthly quota, the gains here after 3 years totals $1.6 million. That is incredible. That's what we're talking about here. And this is where we can get companies to and help you start achieving. And this is with one role. Imagine if you roll this out across your company and you start hiring A players everywhere. You start ramping them up with your modern performance reviews. You're going to build a company of your dreams so quickly. So that's just a quick example. This again is the modern HR process, and how we get there is following this path, making sure we're going through all these steps, making sure we're double checking our key data HR points, making sure we're validating, optimizing, and looking at it, and then refining as we go after this, year after year, going through the same cycle. This is what really does make it game-changing efficiency gains for you, is following this roadmap and working with Castle HR. Questions on this side that we get at the end. Who will actually be working on our modern HR process? When you join the Castle family, you are assigned one single senior HR professional. They all have between 10 and 30 years of experience. They will work with you on everything. We want that continuity where they're going to be giving you advice, they're drafting your handbook, they help create your performance review, they're working with you on your ideal employee profile for hiring. Everything is from them, because you need that continuity. You need to know you're talking to the same person. They understand who you are. They're the ones that help you build your values. Who better, right? So that's who will be working with you. You're going to have that one person. Do you help if there's an employee situation? Yes. As much as we talk about the HR process, that first one, number one, is unlimited advice. So we're going to help you through any employee situation, whether it's dealing with an employee who's constantly late, all the way up to a sexual harassment situation, and everything in between. We're also going to provide relevant documentation that goes with it. So if we're talking about for late employees, we can draft, warning letters. For terminations, we can talk about, what is fair comp, provide best practices on that side, so you're not overpaying or underpaying, which would expose the business to a lawsuit. You're not going to give release forms to low risk terminations, only to ones that will actually you need in place to protect the business. There's a whole bunch of areas that we help out on that side. Ultimately, we are that HR door that you can knock on for any advice. And we always say there are no bad questions. If it's something we can't help with, then we probably know somebody that does it really well and can point you in that direction. How much time is required from my end? We do most of the heavy lifting. That's where our expertise comes in. Having these HR professionals that have decades of experience, they're going to be able to tackle these challenges in the background without much assistance, but they do need to talk to you. They do need your direction. They need to understand your values. This is your company at the end of the day. So we do need some, and it's between 4 to 6 hours a month is the investment that we look for. And that might change. Initially, there would be a little bit more at the start, and then we're going to sort of balance it out as we sort of smooth out later on. But ultimately, there is a tiny investment of time from your side. What happens after a year? As we've kind of been talking about, this isn't a one-stop shop solution. You're going to constantly want to refine these processes and go through it. And think about how when you're a company of 10 people, you grow to 30 people, you grow to 50 people, you grow to 100 people. You're a different company and have different goals and cultures at those milestones. And you want that reflected across all of your HR strategies. So that's why we keep coming back to that process and going through that wheel keep refining it, get better at hiring, get better at identifying who's going to be successful in your company. This is what we want to keep doing. And here are the current options that are in the market. Like we talked about right off the top, the solution we were looking to provide is bridge that gap between, once you have market fit at sort of that 10 to 15, 20 mark headcount, up to that 50 headcount where traditionally people bring on HR. There's so much that can be done in that span to help accelerate the growth of your company and, just increase your success. So hiring internally, if you're looking at comparable people, you're probably at least $80,000. Our HR people are typically in the six-figure range. If you're looking to bring them on individually, you can go the other way and hire a junior person that maybe has, sort of 2, 3, 5 years experience, but they're honestly just not going to be experts. They don't have enough experience, so there's no replacing that. They might be really good at one aspect, but they don't understand that holistic solution or able to give you that sage advice on situations. They're also going to be working just on the one company. So they're not going to be able to draw from other aspects like our portfolio of clients and see what best practices are or have a history to draw from as well. And they definitely aren't as data focused as we are. They're not looking at that employee lifetime value in the same aspect and looking to extend those milestones and understand the data points that are really going to impact your business and help you grow to that company that you want to be. At the end of the day, you're also going to have employee challenges anytime you hire somebody, which will happen with an HR person, not necessarily with a contractor. Never ending to-do list. There's too many internal HR people that we've talked to that we come back to a year and a half later, and they have literally the same to-do list because they just haven't been able to execute on it because there's been other business priorities thrown at them in random and just keeping them busy. So this is where we can take those things off of people's lists and we just execute in the background. Like we know what we're going to do. We are professionals. So that's where it comes to option 2, which is Castle HR, an outsourced HR solution. We have seasoned professionals that, again, sage advice, have been there, done that. We have this structured process that's been proven that is going to produce a solid modern HR strategy for you that's going to give you the results you're looking for. We are a subscription basis. So when you're looking at other options in the outsourced HR, it can be done hourly rate. Like think about an employment lawyer. That's an expensive endeavor and they just keep that meter ticking. So you don't know what you're actually going to end up spending and what you're going to get and what the value is. We are very structured on that side. We have a proactive mindset where we're always looking to optimize our processes. You kind of get that. So we're going to be implementing that. Like that's just our mindset is how do we do better? And this is how we got to this point. And if we look back a year from now, it's going to be like, how are we just doing that? It's going to be so much better, and you're going to be able to understand the ROI you're getting from Castle HR because we're measuring those data points, because we're looking at how we're influencing the top and bottom line, because we're measuring things like employee turnover and what that actually is costing the company. You're actually going to be able to ascribe a dollar value to HR. And we are going to be a profit center for you, one of the biggest ones in your entire company because we touch your entire company. And then it's going to turn you into that talent destination, which is just going to amplify all the success we're talking about. Once you're able to get on that streak where you're hiring just A players and you get up to that 75 to 90% A players in your organization, all overachieving, that's when the magic happens and you're just going to take off and you're going to blink and be like, how did we get to this point? And it's going to be amazing. I'm so excited for it. Common challenges that people are running into before they come to Castle HR is they were never trained on HR. They never went through a course. They never went through a designation. So they simply don't understand what it takes. And they're certainly not familiar or doing the research to understand what modern HR is these days and don't have a portfolio of clients where you're iterating and A/B testing to optimize those processes. I always joke about HR being on the back burner. It's been sitting there for a little bit where you've tried to get to market fit. You're trying to scale your company now. Now's the time to pull it off where you want to grow the team and invest in that. And that is when you sort of want to pull in Castle HR and help build out that initial HR strategy. Looking at your turnover rate is over 20%, or you don't know your average, how long your new hires stay. These are big, big data points that we want to monitor and optimize because as we saw, even just with Quest, a couple of weeks and making tough decisions for your team can save you hundreds of thousands of dollars. These are big impacts. So you want to know what these major data points are. And what you might be feeling as a data point is a churn burn in your wallet. If you're spending too much money, or every 6 to 12 months, you're replacing the same seat, the same role, and having to pay recruitment fees for this, that's something you're going to understand, and that's something we can help reduce right away. Compensation increases are done without a validating mechanism. It's such a big impact on your team. You're basically treating B and C players the same as your A players. Your A players are not going to be happy, not going to feel validated. They're going to leave. And that's a quick way to build an entire team of underachieving Bs and Cs. Not what you want. If you have a ton of Glassdoor reviews that are not positive, that's a big struggle, which can lead to candidates not joining your team, right? If they're going to go do their research, they're going to look at the Google reviews, they're going to look at Glassdoor, and if they're not positive, they're not singing your praises, you're not a talent magnet, they're going to go somewhere else. So you need to have that aligned. You might be able to identify the A players, but if they're not coming and joining your team or not staying long, that's a concern. Your current HR person is underwater. If they're just swamped and you got a round of funding, or they have too many initiatives on their plate that they can't deal with, that's where Council HR can come in and complement them. Really take some things off their plate and be like, hey, you focus on this, we'll execute on this side. And it works very harmoniously. And companies have really accelerated. You saw that with ThinkOn at the beginning, where they were able to just take off with their growth. And they're going to be upwards of growing from 40 to 80 and doubling in size in 2020. Incredible. You lost significant time adjusting to the new normal. That was a great litmus test for a lot of people to understand how well their HR strategies are doing. If you were scrambling and downloading templates and running to the TV to see what was happening and asking everybody else what was going on, and then maybe still don't have a return to work strategy in place, or still don't know whether you should go back to the office or not, that's when we can help and build those strategies out for you. The benefits of Council HR are just massive. You're going to have 12-month access to your senior HR professional for unlimited advice. So any situation that comes up regarding HR, we'll be able to give you advice, whether we can solve it or advise you to work with a certain other person. Going through that employee retention rate, focusing on just the values to influence the actions, to influence your culture, that's going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars and reduce that employee retention rate. So it's key that we look at that number. Huge benefit on that side. You will lead your team with modern performance reviews and see their productivity and their growth year over year. You'll have that visibility into the succession map of what your team's going to grow into, who's going to be moving up into leadership as your team expands and grows, and what that next level looks like. Massive for leadership to understand on that side. You will have a deep, comprehensive, ideal employee profile. Identify A players, your A players that will contribute between 50% and 400% more output than your average hire. So that means you're getting 2 to 3 to 4 times your money's worth when you're hiring these A players. Just incredible growth at that point. You will save years of time when you're having these multipliers just all working in your favor. All these processes going, and millions of dollars. If you're thinking about saving $250,000 on an annual basis, start stacking that as you grow as well. We're not just stopping at 250. The next year we want to be higher. We want to be more and more and more and more efficient. Higher, better, 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 better. This is what we're looking to do. It's just all about stacking those processes and that efficiency together. You will have less anxiety because you have a senior HR professional. One of the big things I hear from people as soon as they sign on and almost have that first kickoff call with the HR person is there's such a weight lifted off their shoulders that they know that this is handled by someone. They are competent, they're going to get their job done, and they don't have to worry about it anymore. It's such a relief for a business owner and leader to have that peace of mind. And ultimately, you're going to grow the company of your dreams, be a renowned leader, be that talent destination, and be asked how you did it. And Council HR is definitely going to be one of the reasons why. And this is why we work with so many different partners and clients. From DMZ works with us to 111 to PeerScale. We have great partners in like the CFO Center. We work with a ton of different tech companies, professional services, and some retail ones as well. And this is why people trust us, is because we have this structured process. So what are the next steps? Click get a price, book a time to speak with us. We would love to hear what what you're doing. There's a quick application process where you're going to fill out some questions to see if you're a good candidate for our modern HR strategies. If you are a good fit and we go through this and we decide to work together, we'll then schedule a time in the next sort of couple months where we can slide you in. We only take on, at this point, we're taking on 4 clients per month. And that's because we are so dedicated at the beginning for that foundation that we don't flood our people with too many new hires. And then we also want to have the bandwidth to be able to take care of our existing portfolio. So we have a slow but steady growth. So it's all a matter of like when you're looking to start up with us. Once we've done that, we schedule that kickoff call, have that initial handoff to the HR person. You guys get going on that foundation. And then, like I said, that's when the weight comes off a lot of people's shoulders. And then you're going to feel great that you're starting to build that modern HR strategy. And you're going to see an impact within that first quarter with that foundation. It's going to be fantastic. If you do have any other questions, reach out. Let's have a conversation. Same process. Click on get a price. Fill out the couple questions. Let's set some time aside to have a conversation. Other than that, I want to thank you for taking time to watch the video today. Look forward to chatting soon. And again, my name is Tom Nickalls from Castle HR. Have a great day.